Okay, this lesson for the Quantity Project class is just to use the creation, as I would like to say, do we have to be astrophysicists to crack creation codes? Well, not if we use this methodology, for example, as in the holistic hermeneutics that Dr. John Penn developed. This method is used in physics, and of course, when you go through items, I have files and files of notes and things that we had done in collaborating. Dr. Eddie Johnson and I are research assistants for Dr. John Penn. So you find things, you notice there's not a field of study of which he was not familiar with which that is. So when we look at this one, it's I.S.E.E, literally. The first step is to let's find the variable, which seems to be what's missing, and we have the known things like constants. So let's just look at um, terms we have. Uh, Biome, for example, and that's in Genesis 2:4, and it translates in the word. That's the same word for day as for time, and this prefix preposition is in. So in time, Genesis 2:4, and then we have this term, Ray. Yeah, here we go. Ray sheath. There we go. And then use block here for the Hebrew class that I teach for the children. They love those letters. Sorry, I left that. So that's Genesis 1:1. So now we have in time creation, and now we have in beginning. And you can already see now where our variable emerges is what's between that. And then we have that, what is it, Haya, and that's H 1961. That's come to be. And then we have G 1096 Genomai, which is in the Koine. And this is the word used in Koine translating this term, and it's come to be. There. And then, of course, before I leave off and be irresponsible, instantaneity, Isaiah 48:3. Let me see where I can write that. I'll write instantaneity. That's Isaiah 48:3. Now that's in Credenda 2. I believe it was 1984 publication. I'll place a link online in the description. So now we can look here and what are we seeking? What's the variable, since there's such a disparate reality? Dr. Al Mohler, a renowned scholar, was trying to describe and by descriptions explain why the world looks so old, and then he switched to Earth. It went from world to the Earth, and he was then later in his explanation, or I guess lecture, he then said he couldn't underestimate the theological expense that people would incur who retain an old earth position. So I guess that's the way theologians threaten each other. So a lot of it's social, which is disappointing because we can actually use our Bible and study. So we have instantaneity, which would go with in beginning, and we know in physics, for example, we also know the Bible tells us God doesn't change, he's immutable. So no time transpired and no loss of energy was incurred. He did not change. So that's why instantaneity. In time in Genesis 2:4 would refer to the 6 days, that those actual in time creation. And this come to be and get a mind. That's interesting, but this really didn't solve anything except give people something, a young or an old side, to join. So now we want to set up the problem. And before we do, let's notice the young versus old, which verse, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means to combat someone for a position they take that has not yet been established. It's just sometimes it can be exasperating when someone doesn't wish to collaborate except for us. We collaborate, we use the tools. Someone asked me, how do I engage in so much study? And I asked them, how do they remain on the lake fishing all day when no one's there with them? And they said, well, I love to fish. So I'm never sure what to say to people who don't enjoy studying and don't engage in it. So this would be chronological, which seemed to be the concern that I found from people, that the chronologies in the Bible would be incredulous in the Bible. Of course, if you have the old Bibles from a generation ago, the scholars like Bullinger and Salem Kurban, I think's his name. Anyway, they adamantly affirmed that the chronologies were never intended to age date the earth. Well, now the chronologies are under attack, so now we're defending the age of the earth to help shore up, I suppose, which is commendable, very commendable. So now we have young versus old, and this would be geological age. So we can now start plugging in our data, and we notice Psalm 90, where 90% of lifespan was reduced of 100% mankind. So now we see the decay rates accelerated after the flood. We see that it was God's response to curtail violence on the earth. We also have the chiasmus inversion. One day is like 1,000 years, and then 1,000 years is like one day. Peter wrote that. So we've got that in the Bible. So now we're putting our data together. We have the Psalm 90. We have the New Covenant, New Testament. Peter wrote this. So then we have genealogical calculations, approximations, where Usher, for example, put together approximately 6,000 years. Of course, he said the Earth would end 1996, October 23rd. That is, the world would end. So we know it's approximation. So there's no reason to ridicule all that work he did. So here we have a range of 6 to 20,000 years. The difference being is 14,000. So we just went through these steps under the guided research. Dr. John Penn, for example, he would guide us, give us research parameters, which means stay in the Bible, use the numbers. So we have a difference now of 14. So we took half of that and started with 6 to 7,000 in increments of 250. So we started with 6,250. Well, immediately, that gave us more data. So we found 12-hour day. Jesus said there's 12-hour day. So let me keep this cleaned up. So here we go. And then, of course, it's very emotional for those who don't know how to set up a problem, or unwilling to do the work, or don't practice the science of interpretation, such as the holistic approach, where you include all the data. And this one here is something that Dr. Penn was most aware of. Ironic, because one of his biggest challenges was go through his life having injured and lost one of his eyes, and yet he's got so much insight. So as we proceed now, this step says execute the solution. So we'll execute the solution by first finishing what we can know here, 360-day year. There we go. There's another piece of data. Then if we have a 12-hour day, like Jesus said, we have a 12-hour night. There we go. So now let's see here, we want to execute the solution. So what we do is take 6,250 years at 12-hour day, and then 6,250 years at 12-hour night. Now this gives us 12,500 years at 24 hours of day, night. And then we remember the inverse relationship between division is multiplication. That's third grade arithmetic. Again, we don't need an astrophysicist at this moment, but we're still limiting ourselves to just what can we know in the Bible. So if we did this 12,500 times 360 days, that would equal 4.5 million days. If we multiply it by 1,000 years, that would give us 4.5 billion years. Well, the option now is you need to notice that we still have chronological and we also have geological. So this would be geological decay. And that's the amount of decay accrued. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to evaluate it and see if we can find things that are convincing, so that if we notice, let's go now 1,000 years to a day, if we took that 4.5 and multiplied it by 1,000 days, well, we know 1,000 days is approximately 2.78 360 day years. So we multiply that, well, that would equal 12.5 billion geo decay years, or amount of decay. So that's how many years, 12.5 billion years of decay. Again, we haven't asked the astrophysicist to come yet to the class. We haven't invited him to our Sunday school. We haven't invited him to preach or anything. So we really want to keep evaluating it. So as we were told and had our attention called, Dr. Penn, of course, Genesis 1:1 has the number pi in it. John 1:1 has the number E. So when we noticed E equals 2.71828, now that repeats, so you just go 1828 and infinite. So this is interesting because this is used to calculate compound interest, for example. Well, what we're dealing with is compound decay. So now we can notice that E 2.7, well, 2, let's just say 2, approximately 2.72, and this 2.78 demonstrate to us the amount of decay accrued and compounded, because you remember we have now an exponential decay rate. We're dying 10 times faster than those before the flood. And then we have an exponential decay rate at approximately E compound. That's used for calculating compound decay. So this is what we can do. We didn't have to, as you see people, they really like camps. They like switching back and forth. If you don't know how to do evaluation, then you just choose and prefer accusation, I suppose. But this is something for those who are intrigued and interested in the Bible. We live by it. We know physics, calculus, and chemistry were derived from it. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.